So welcome everyone. Welcome to our online meetup. My name is Max, and I had education community for Okta workflows. Today we have a guest, Christian, and he'll tell you a little bit about himself. But we did an event together. Was it March and April of
hmm
this year? Yeah, about creating dashboards in Okta workflows. So if you folks want to see, we have that on our YouTube playlist under workflows. But thank you, Christian, for returning for another session. But today's topic is organizing flows into, well, flows, folders, tables, and how to organize your automations. So that's the topic for today. And before we get started, so again, this event is being recorded, and then we'll publish the recording on our YouTube, Okta YouTube channel sometime tomorrow. You will get a message with a link to to the to the recording and any other resources we share today, also tomorrow. And lastly, if you have any questions, again, post them in the chat or the Q&A panel, whichever you prefer. And that's it for the introduction. I can stop sharing, and Christian, you can share your screen.
All right. Awesome. Thanks, Max. Hey, everybody. I do recognize a couple names, so thanks for joining. And I hope this is useful. I'm going to share my screen real quick, and we're going to jump right into it. Bear with me one second. Let me get the right screen. So if you were part of the previous meetup that we talked about the OIG dashboards, one of the things I teased in that video was about organizing. Managing workflows. I realize I've been working on workflows heavily, I'd say, in the last 3 years, but I've been working with workflows probably since we acquired the company with workflow. So it's been a long time, but I've learned a lot, and I'm consistently learning more and more how to make workflows easier to manage and easier to build and maintain and document. So what I'd really like to do is kind of talk through some of the lessons learned that I've used that's really streamlined, not only building out workflows for myself for demos. Keep in mind that, oh, by the way, I didn't do my full introduction too. So again, my name is Christian Mayoris. I'm on what's called the product acceleration team for Okta Identity Governance. Um, with governance, one of the products that we offer when you purchase governance, you also get both lifecycle management and workflows. So workflows, while I always advertise with customers or prospects that workflows are not necessarily required to do governance, they are a really cool tool to be able to extend or orchestrate what we do out of the box, or extend what we do out of the box to something that's more customized for your environment. For example, if somebody might get removed access because of an access certification, you may want to send a special notification or create a ticket in your ITSM. Workflows is a great tool for that. So that's why you'll hear me talk a lot about workflows in the governance context, but you can use it for anything. And so today, I'm going to first start talking about some fundamentals, at least fundamentals, the way I look at workflows and what I've seen to help manage them. Now, I assume, Max, everyone, you can see my screen correctly, workflow screen.
Yes,
All
yes.
right, perfect. All right, so because I work here and I do a lot of workflows, obviously I have some uses. I have around 828 active flows in my tenant and a lot of tables. So I've learned also over the time to be able to be a little more efficient with my flows, and that's one of the things I really want to share with everyone else here as well. So first thing I'd like to do is start out with the flows themselves in the folders. What I've learned, and this is going to be, some of this is going to be because I do a lot of demos, but I want to kind of translate that into production and how you could think about it in your production environment. And I'll explain what I mean by that. The first tip or trick I would offer is start with a very high level hierarchy of the types of flows that you're going to have. And what I mean by that is, you may have noticed, I always do in preview, which is traditionally not as a robust environment as production. So I'm always working here. But when you start to pull out and build out a lot of these folders at the root level, every time the screen paints, it has to repaint those folder structures. So what I've learned is to truncate them or minimize the number of high-level hierarchies of folders overall. You'll notice as I start clicking into them, and they go in deep, I go very, very deep. Again, with 800 or so flows, there's a lot of information in here. And if you have them always open like this, it repaints slower. So I've learned to, again, come up with a hierarchy, maybe start at the top level, whatever makes the most sense. Now, for me, again, part of my job that I do here is I do a lot of demoing. So I at the top level, I have a section. I'm gonna collapse
Hey,
this up again.
Christian, sorry, I'm gonna there's one ask, can you maybe make your screen
Oh,
bigger?
yes, thank you. I always forget that. Thank you. Great call out.
Thank
Perfect.
you.
All right, this should work a little better.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, so because I do a lot of demos, you're going to see that I have a section related to just my demos, things that are active, things that I run demos and showcase already pre-built workflows. I have another area called workshop, and this is where I am actively building new things and trying new things. So again, categorization or organization. If you keep it at the higher level, it also allows you to kind of traverse. Since there isn't a search in here, and I know that's a very common ask, and I can't wait for it to happen. Because you can't search, it's easier than by organizing the folder structure. I'll give you an idea where something would be and where to find it. Now, I'll also show you what I do related to Okta identity governance. So this would also be something I think is very important. So for example, in Okta identity governance, I have things that I'm working on, but governance itself is made up of components or features. For example, access certification. There's different flavors of access request. There's entitlements. There's segregation of duty. These are all subcomponents of Okta identity governance. So you'll even notice is when I break it down in here, I have two different or multiple categories of different types of access requests. So again, what I've learned to be able to do is categorize these. So then I know fundamentally where to go look. So if I need to go give a demo on something related to Okta identity governance related to entitlements, I'm going to go in here, go to demo examples. I'm going to go entitlements. And I'm going to then find all those different types of flows related to governance. So again, just something lessons learned that I've learned that makes my life a ton easier when I need to go find something quickly. I'm also going to show you a really super cool trick for flows that you may not have thought about or how to find a flow. And this is something I kind of learned the hard way. I didn't realize it was there until afterwards. And that is, say for example, I know I need to make an update to a flow that's related to running Slack or sending a message via Slack. How do I go about finding it in this mess? Right? It's nearly impossible. I'd have to open up each one, and the lag that can be there, depending on the number of flows, can take a while. Here's a really cool trick. Instead of searching through here, go to the connections, click on the connections, and then look for that connection. For example, I'm looking for Slack. I can look for any one of them. So you can see I have a lot of connections enabled here, but let's go Slack, for example. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to look at usage. You click on usage. This is going to show me every flow that exists in all my different categories of folders in which that Slack is actually being connected to. So an easy way to kind of then pinpoint, and then you can go from there and you can click on find the flow and go right to the flow.
Oh, this is really cool. I mean, I knew about the usage, this view, but I never used this approach. So this is
Yeah.
cool.
Make it a lot easier. Again, if I'm doing raw API calls and I'm having to use an API token, which we don't typically, we don't want you, we'd rather use the Okta OAuth to be able to do it. But say I did have to go find it, I can click here to usage, and then you're right there. I can find the flow that's being used by that. So a quick, easy way to be able to figure out what's being used and which ones you got to go update. Now, one of the other areas I think are really super important is for customers that are running production level workflows. The concept that I think would be very valuable is the concept of utility flows. And what do I mean by that? I mean that there's going to be common flows that you're going to run that do things that you may share across multiple flows. And what you should try to avoid is making multiple instances of that same flow and scattering around different folders. Because then if you say in the future you need to make a change, then you're going to have to hit multiple locations. So what I've learned to do, and I don't do it in my folder structure because I do mostly demos. I don't do production code for all my Okta tenants. So it's a little different for me, but the way I show it, and I'll show it to you here, is I'll go to one of my flows and I'll show you how I do it. So two things I like to showcase here is I build flows and I use the word utility in the very beginning. The reason I do that is because when you're referencing a flow, calling it from another flow, for example, I'll open up this one. When you first look at it, let me scroll to the right. You first look at it, you're going to see the version and then utility. So I know because this can only show so many characters. So what I do is I first call those utility flows, I put a number on them, and I put the word utility in. So then I also know that whenever I run this one, that I know where I can go locate it, right? So it's easier to organize where these are. The other really helpful thing, and I know everyone knows this already, or at least understands there's some pain points related to flows in the sense of if I go, for example, and I want to make a copy of this folder, and I duplicate this folder, in this case, I have 20 plus flows that exist in here. One of the problems is if I have a main flow and that references subflows, those subflows will be in the previous folder. So you have to go update each reference flow. So I'll wait for this to end. So where I'm going with this is in use cases where I need to copy a large number of flows. If I'm using a utility folder and those utilities stay, you won't have to make a change there because you're pointing it to a central location for the utilities. But for the ones that are common only to that flow and you want to make a newer version, the idea here is you're going to want to go in here and you want to say, for example, this is version 8. I'm updating a new version. I'll show you what's happening here. Again, this is a little trick that I do. So if, for example, if I go to the main flow, let's use this delegated flow, and I want to rename this. I'll call this version 9. And I want to then update all my flows and I want to put them in a new folder. Well, you're going to notice right away, this one's version 9, but as I scroll to the right, these are all version 8. So these are still pointing to that old folder. So if I click here, you're going to notice this new one opens up and it's pointing to the version 8 folder. So I have to change all those. So the painful part is that you got to go through each of them. But if you start naming them, meaning if I go back in this folder here and I go through each flow that I have, give me 1 second. It takes a minute to paint on mine because of preview. So say, for example, I want to update this one. I would change this one here, version 9. But when I go to the other flow, if I'm still referencing version 8, I know it's not pointing to the right one. So I need to go change it and relink it to the other folder. So just an easier way to manage those, especially when you get long, complex sets of flows. So just it's a really good, useful tool, at least what I've used over and over. All right, I'm going to pause there. Any questions with that so far? Has anyone tried doing something similar like that? I wonder. See if there's any.
Yeah, I don't see any questions,
Okay.
but there was one person said that being able to search the folders, would be nice. So I shared the link to an Okta idea, so please upvote. So it is on a roadmap. There's no time when it
Yep.
will be, but the more people vote for it, I think the sooner it will get into kind of a
Yeah.
they'll
More
take it.
likely to get on the
Yeah,
roadmap.
yeah, yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, it says on the roadmap again. It's probably the long-term roadmap, but
Yep.
yeah, you'll get
The more upvotes will
yes,
visibility to that idea, which then puts it higher in the priority list to be included in a more of a shorter term roadmap.
exactly, exactly.
Yep. Yeah, please do that. So again, my idea here for customers to be able to take advantage of workflows, thank you, somebody voted already, is I would literally come up here and create a category called utility and say this is utility based helper flows. I would create that category. oops, and I would start putting flows that other folder flows use and store them in that main utility folder. That way that you could say, for example, make a copy of one of these folders. If they're pointing here, that will never change. That's going to save you a lot of extra work, because when you get into very complex flows, for example, this has 24 flows. I have to go to each one and make a change. And then I have to go to each reference in the flow to make that change as well. And that takes time. It takes a lot of effort. For example, here, you're going to notice on this version 9, as I go through from left to right, is the way I built this out, very linear. Let me scroll over. So there's a version 8, there's a version 8, there's a version 8, there's a version 8. I'm going to have to go here and relink to the version 9 version each time. So again, if you put them in a utility folder, that will save you, for those things that are repeatable, it will save you a lot of effort. Now, you may find maybe you just want a main utility folder for all of this and just point to it. You can do that as well. You don't have to do it for only flows that are shared across multiple. You still could have a main location. And that way, if you make copies of your main flow, you don't have to repeat and update each of those. Just a couple of lessons learned over time. Now, one of the other things I like to chat about is maintenance of flows and how to best troubleshoot some of these flows also. And when we start talking about utility flows, for example, like I'll focus on this one right here. This utility flow is there to be able to find a Google Sheet ID, because I need to use that Google Sheet ID to make updates to it. And so this utility does nothing more than say, send me the sheet name, and I'll tell you which one it's processing, and I'll give you back the actual sheet ID. What's cool about this is, if I go and look at this flow, for example, if I click and open this flow, this will take a second. Oops, clicked the wrong one. Hold on. When I run these, what you're going to notice is, because I'm passing the sheet name across, I can also tell in the actual flow which one it was doing it for. So passing data to those downstream utilities, if it's shared across multiples, you can leverage that by passing like a bit of data as one of the field values across. So for example, here this is called sheet name. I could also say, you know, flow step in flow. I could do that. And when I save that, I could then reference that. So if I call here, I'd also have another question called step and flow. I could then put a version or a note in there. So then if I have to go troubleshoot and I look at the execution history here, I'd see which part of which flow or what step was actually being used as part of that. And so it saves you troubleshooting time to kind of trace back. So when you build these utility flows and you're sharing them, you need to know which main flow called you. So passing data down in that, it doesn't really do anything for this helper flow, but it does help me in the execution history. And I don't have any in here. It does help me in the execution history to determine who actually called it. So that's really helpful. The other thing that I do a lot of is in my flows is well, let me go here. Let me go back. I want to go right to the right table. I think it's here. So also, when I'm building out flows, sometimes there's a lot of steps that are happening at the same time. So it causes me to try to figure out what part of the flow was working and what values we're able to get. And so what I've done here is I've also, as part of a flow, created in my case, I'll call it an access request report history flow. And what this is doing is, in certain sections of the flow, I'm actually calling a helper flow that says update history. And what does that do? It sends over to it the name of the flow, the status, and any details. And what I'm doing is I'm storing that in here. So if I go here and I'll sort this by, oops, hold on. Cancel. So sort that by time. You'll see that I can see each step that's calling from there, and I'm updating a table. In some cases, I leave that in there if I'm troubleshooting, but I might get to a point where I'm very comfortable with those process and I don't need to update every little bit of a flow. But you can put this anywhere in any of your flows to say, I've gotten to this point in the flow, go let the database know that I've gotten here. So then if I have to go back and troubleshoot, yes, I can click the execution history and trace it, but I could also verify, were these attributes or values getting passed from one flow to another? Were they correct at the time? Was I sending across a string versus an array, that type of thing? So it gives you a glimpse into that data. It's another easy way to manage and troubleshoot where you have problems and flows as you're rolling them out. So it's another thing that I do a lot of. All right, I'm going to pause there and see, is there... Okay, great question. And Laura. So again, when I'm rolling out production level flows, what I will do is use the table in that flow area. So say, for example, I wouldn't probably put this in the utility section. You could, but I'd put it more compact or more close by to the flows that I'm troubleshooting or building out. And I use that as a reporting mechanism to determine. So I don't do that for every flow. I do it for more of the more complex ones that I use. So if I'm doing something basic like generating a password, obviously it doesn't matter. But if I have, for example, 20 or 30 flows, I leverage this kind of approach to be able to pinpoint how far did it get in the flow before it had a problem, or am I passing the right data? Because there's always a lot of times you got to go back and manipulate the data. Maybe it's not in the right format that you're needing for another API call. Does that help? Hopefully that helps. All right, perfect. So again, using this history or these flows, I'll show you exactly what I did here. And it's extremely simple. As I pop open this flow. Sorry, it takes a second. It's really just to want a table, create record in a table. So I'm setting up a helper flow with the different values that I'm storing in the table. So the flow name, the status, and the details. You could be as verbose or as complex as you want to be here. It's up to you. So depending on doing it, what you're saving and what you're storing and what you want to put in the table. So it's really, I'm just gathering those bits of detail because that's what's important in my flow, and I'm storing them right directly in those tables. The end result is I have step, I have the status, and I have the details. So again, you can make it as complex as you need. It just helps in troubleshooting and figure out where things are working and not working. All right. See if there's any questions. Any outstanding questions? Looks like we don't have any questions. All right.
No.
Okay. So another thing I'd like to chat about and is about organizing the actual flows themselves. And what I mean by that is, if I'm thinking about this from two perspectives. One is, if I'm the sole workflow builder and I get hit by a train, what does that mean for my customer or my company? That means that somebody else is going to have to go back and try to interpret what did I do. I think so not only from my own career perspective, I think it's a good thing to do for my company. But I also think that your company should say, hey, yeah, you should do that. Now, my approach to doing that is something that it's evolved over time. My approach now is to document my workflows. And what I mean by that is, and I'll zoom in here too, is I've now learned to take my flows and start to build out exactly what are they doing. So you will see in some cases it can get very complex. So by doing it this way, I've also learned to build my flows very linear, meaning start and an end, and everything's called from the main flow. Now, you will have some subflows that have their own subflows. Those are fine, but having it documented and traceable, not only from the flow, but maybe a diagram perspective, really does help troubleshoot. And what I mean by that, you're going to notice that in my case, you can see that this is a delegated flow. I need to get the ID, the application name. So my input is give me the application name. The output of that is going to get the application ID, and I'm going to pass that out over to, I'm first getting the name. I'm passing it to a search application card, the name, and the output's going to be the ID. I need that ID to get passed downstream to other cards. So I don't need it here, but I do need it later on. So I'll go down and you'll find it later on. So I'm using each one of these to kind of depict what's my input and what's my output. And it allows me to trace it, not only in the UI, but also here. The other thing I do is, as mentioned, is utility flows. So I'm going to scroll over here. What I've learned to do is document those utility flows in the main flow. So I know that from this run flow pull entitlements and values card, I'm going to, or this it's actually an API call. It's not an actual card. So let me say it that way. It's just a custom API action card. I'm going to call this utility flow. I'm going to send it the spreadsheet ID, and I'm going to get the new updated sheet ID when it comes back. So it returns this value back to me, and that's what gets passed to the next set of cards. So you're going to notice that I do this for each one, and it um, allows me to better manage how am I passing the details. But then if I had to give this to somebody, they'd have a better idea what I'm actually doing and what I'm accomplishing. So documenting these, I think, is really, really important. All right. Is there any questions? It looks like there's some questions coming up.
Yeah, so there was an interesting question from Daniel. I responded by Daniel asked if who created this chart.
I did. Yep. I manually went in and I created it. So again, what I've learned over time is I found if I start to document high level, I could start in the chart here and start to say, I want to do this. I want to do this. I then can go back and add things like inputs and outputs. And then I can start to actually build some of that in here. So if I go back to this flow here, what you're going to see, if I do the flow chart version of this, sorry, let me move this up a little bit. You're going to see me making calls, comment, call flow, comment, call flow, comment, call flow, comment. That's those are representative of those subflows. It might be a utility flow, it might be another flow, but I'm using this way to kind of trace everything back. And then I'm making what I've learned, at least for my case, I like managing the flows this way a lot easier. There are cases, again, you can see here, I'm doing multiple. There's an if there's an if else if, and here there's multiple flows here too, but it's based upon what am I doing there. So this is just easier for me to troubleshoot. So I'm translating what I'm doing here into the Lucid chart, and I'm building it out in such a way that I can follow those. And then I could hand this over to somebody and then have a better idea of what I'm trying to do. All right, see if there's any.
So there's a question, I guess sort of follow up if there's a way workflows can create a chart with some details. I guess that's what you mean. That's what you're showing now.
Yeah, you mean create these charts? No, I mean, well, Max, you could say what you did with ChatGPT or with Gemini, potentially.
Yes. Well, so yes, so you can actually, and actually, I'm about to publish a blog post about it, but you can ask, Gemini or ChatGPT to describe what a flow does. And it's really pretty accurate. Now, I have not tried. I mean, I don't know. Can I generate a chart like that? I don't know.
Might be kind of cool.
I have not tried that. But
Yeah,
you can, yeah, you can export your flows and upload them to again to ChatGPT or Gemini, and it will describe what it does. But yeah, I don't know if it can generate a flow like this. I mean, a chart like this. It would be
yeah,
cool.
yeah. We should look into that. We'll look into that. See what we
Yeah,
can.
yeah.
I'm just looking to see if there's anything else here. Doesn't exporting the flow include information like the API tokens? That's a great call out, Dax. Um, there's a couple ways to think about avoiding that as well. So, Max, you could talk about. I think we encrypt that, right? The API token is encrypted.
Yeah, so when you export a flow, so anything in the connection is not in the flow. It does not get exported.
Yep.
So be when you import a flow, you'll see that you need to set a connection for each card that requires a connection. So none of your connection information is exported. Now you have to be just careful. Sometimes, like we see people will set up a call and they do include the API key in the flow itself,
Yep.
right? So that will get exported, right? So that's
Yes.
why we always recommend whenever possible, is to keep any connection information or authentication in a connection, right? Anything you put in the compose card or will be just plain text.
Yep. The other approach that I've seen customers use is using the connector builder and
Hmm.
actually doing it inside the connector builder, which is not exportable. So you can't pull that data out. So that's another way to hide it. But again, from Okta's perspective, at least from a governance side, as we roll out new features, you may see that there might be a lag in the API being supported under the custom API action card. But it usually is a fast follow. I'm usually one to catch it and say, we need to make sure that's updated. It usually comes by fairly quickly. Your goal should always be, in my interpretation, is leveraging the Okta connection. And if the API card doesn't exist, by the way, a bunch of governance cards are coming targeted for Q4, I believe, safe harbor, but targeted. But if you want to use something that is not a pre-built card, using the custom API action uses that OAuth connection. And that's the ideal way of doing this. So keep that in mind as well. All right. Oh, I see somebody put in some things about UML and exactly. There's might be some cool ideas we can do there. All right. So let's so we talked about organizing workflows, the folders, the structure. We talked about finding flows using the usage capability under the connector side. Another thing that I think is important, and you'll run into this often, is in the workflows themselves. This kind of is more about a operational side of workflows and APIs. So as mentioned, right, there are cases in which we're creating new APIs, and those APIs may not have been updated inside. Either the scopes haven't been updated, they don't exist, or say, for example, the scopes exist inside Okta, but you haven't enabled them inside your Okta tenant. So if you're like me, and I'll show you a use case. I was just playing with this just a minute ago. Actually, it's over here. Give me 1 second. I'm just waiting for this to pop up. Here it is, password. There it is. I was looking at generating a random password for a customer and looking at what was available there. We do have an API that exists, but when I first got in there, I was getting a 403. So again, this I think is just a good how to fix some of those things and how that works. So if I go to execution history here, you'll notice, yeah, see this API, I was doing something incorrect, but prior to me fixing the scope that was required, I was getting a 403 forbidden. So for anybody that's using workflows and trying to build some of these with new APIs, you may get a 403 forbidden. What I'd suggest to you is once you click into the error and scroll to the right, you're going to see here in the scope, what scope it's missing. And in some cases, this scope may be added inside your workflows app inside of Okta, but it still isn't working. So my recommendation there also is part of organizing this is you can do it a couple different ways. You can click here, click here to the flow. I can click here. I can go to that connection. You can see I do a lot of these, so I have a lot of different versions. I can click here and I can say reauthorize. I can also do it back from the main. I can do it from here, or I can do it from the main menu and do it there. But one thing I'll show you here is if I do reauthorize, what it's going to prompt me for is permissions. Now, you're going to see this option to use default or use custom. If you've gone in, for example, into your application, into workflows, and you've added the scope to the workflows app, and you still reauthorize and you still get an error, then what I would recommend you do is you can go down to the custom scopes advanced and, test this, please test it in preview first. But you can manually go down. For example, I needed to add the where is it? My account password read. I needed to add this scope there. It wasn't there. So I manually added it here and then reauthorized that connection. Once I did that, I was able to make the API call. So another tip or trick, if you're running into problems, even though it may exist at the application level. So again, I've run into this. I'm not sure the source of this problem or why it happens, but easiest way to get around it. So let me go to my workflows OAuth card. Since we were talking about the API, I figured might as well talk about this a little bit too. So again, in here on the API scopes, I've sometimes enabled it here, but it still didn't reauthorize correctly. Two approaches would be you could use the custom or create a brand new connection. That's why you're seeing in some cases I've created new connections. I have multiple. I would recommend cleaning those up if you're in a production environment. Since I'm in a demo, I don't really care as much, but from our production side, clean those up. Make sure you only have one or two. You don't have too many. You don't want those to be left out there. But if you've gone through and granted all these and reestablished and it still didn't work, then my recommendation would be to go back here and add the manual ones here and then reauthorize. And it tends to work for me, or create a new connection, one of the two. All right. All right, how are we doing on time and what are we doing on questions? I wanted to see if there's any more questions.
No questions so far,
Yeah.
or no new questions.
Okay, sounds good. All right. So, um, I'm just making sure I'm hitting all the topics. What are the other topics? I think I hit them all. So we hit organizing, managing the folders themselves. Again, I'll go back to that one piece that I was referring to in passing the data down. So let me find an existing flow. Bear with me 1 second. When leveraging utility flows, oh, oh yeah, I see Daniel's questions. Can you quick examples of the types of you for what I use? So great question. So in my case, Daniel, like when I'm building out like dashboards for access requests or dashboards for access certifications, and I'm using Google Sheets, for example, I have to do things like find Google Sheet IDs and find the sheet ID. And so this is a utility flow. This is an older version. I don't have the word utility in here, but you can see this is when I was building it. But I pass it information, the sheet ID and the sheet name, and it gives me back a value. In this case, what is the sheet ID? And I'll leverage that as a workflow. I would say from a customer perspective, there's going to be flows in which you want to pull an application and you want to pull the application ID based upon the type of app, or I want to pull a group of users or a list of users that exist in a specific group. These things that would be repeatable, that you start to see trends across multiple flows that need to do it. I think you could look at any API that exists in Okta and find, yeah, I need to do that over and over again. So therefore, I would qualify that kind of API as a utility flow that I want to maybe build a common use case around and use it over and over again, if that makes sense. So it's really going to depend on what you need to build for your environment. Like, for example, maybe you want to do a flow that says, give me a list of users that are inactive. And maybe I want to use that list in multiple flows. I could use a flow, which we have a template out there for, to go find inactive users on apps, grab that list and put that flow in it, or those sets of flows in a utility folder, and I could call it from multiple locations. That's really the premise that I'm trying to get across, because it tends to help, especially when you start making copies and updating. If you have them in one location, you don't have to worry about replicating them. And if you replicate them, you can get lost in having multiple copies. Did that help, Daniel? I assume it did. So any additional questions with that? All right, great. So again, when you're taking advantage of these flows, I really want to stress again, when you're doing like the history ones where I'm updating history, pass details along in that flow so that when you're troubleshooting, you can always go back and reference those over and over again. It just allows your troubleshooting. Again, I talked about that. I'm just trying to think if I hit everything. Yeah, I think I've hit all the main topics that I really tried to stress. What I've learned over though is each time I build a new flow, I tend to find a better way of doing it or a more advanced way of organizing it. And so I keep kind of going back and I'll go back to some of my older flows and I might address them. Um, I actually another organizational thing. This is also something that I think you will want to also do when we talked about flows that are leveraging things like APIs. So you may be forced as part of a new set of APIs that have been rolled out, you may be forced to use a custom or not custom API action, you may be forced to do an API token. I would leverage that same concept, organizing that. So maybe every 3 months or 6 months, I go back to my connections. So go back to my main connections tab. I locate those API connector cards that are there, and I go look at the usage. And you can kind of go back and determine which flows do I need to go back and update. Especially again, for governance, we're always rolling out new things, new features. So when we roll out new features, there's APIs that exist there. So typically the first month or two that those are out, I might have to use an API token. I then can go back and look at the usage and go back and say, oh, I got to go update those and then update it to the custom API action card. So it's another security thing that you should think about as you're rolling these out, because the last thing you want is more tokens out there if you don't need them. If you can leverage the OAuth that's there, leverage that first. All right. See if there's any questions. Let's see if Vlad had a question. Oh, gotcha. Yep, that makes sense too, Vlad. Um, all right. Max, I think I've kind of hit all the main topics that I really wanted to hit. I wanted to see anybody else has any more kind of questions and the way to around this. I'd love to jump in more if you have anything specific. All right.
And this was wonderful. I just want to Vlad is asking about UI improvement. Let me just I'm gonna get a link. Yes, I'm gonna give you a link. So there's some improvements are coming. Let me just find the blog post. Give me one sec.
Well, I know we have the entitlements coming for that for workflows as well. So if you are an OIG customer, the specific roles that exist within workflows will also become entitlements. So you can run access certifications on those for those admin roles and be able to manage those as well. So that's also coming. So there's a lot of cool improvements around that. Again, you know what? I would recommend if you haven't already office hours, if you need office hours, if you want to talk about OIG in these, I'm more than happy to kind of walk through examples of these as well. It's really just like tips and tricks. Again, I've gotten better and better over time. It didn't happen overnight. I think I learn something new every single time I get in a workflow, which is great, which it's a lot of fun.
All
Awesome.
right, Vlad, I sent you a link. So you can see there's some UI improvements that are coming. And you can also Okta Ideas is really the best way to resubmit anything. And then have people vote for those capabilities. I'm also happy to answer any questions. We have Workflows office hours. I shared the link above. I'll share it again, and that's for everyone, of course. And then my email, if you want to send me questions. And Christian, I was going to share a link to your office hours.
Yeah.
Let me see if I
If you don't have it, I can grab it.
here. I think I got it. Yeah. So if you want to, right, that's the one Okta-OIG.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. It's related to governance, but we can talk about workflows for governance related use cases for sure. Yep. Awesome.
So, I think there is from a question from Dax. I don't think we answered. What are some of highest value workflows for CM customer use cases, not workforce?
So I don't do a lot of SIAM anymore, but I did for many, many years. So I think I could definitely talk about it. I think one of the ones that I used to see a lot of would be identity proofing. So say, for example, we're doing a registration flow and you need to call a workflow to be able to go do an identity proofing. So we have a lot of connectors related to identity proofing, I believe. I don't remember how many, but I know there's multiple. So that would be a common one that I've seen. Also notifications, updates, passing data, when this customer enables this or does this. I've also seen where we're using workflows to be able to add more data to profiles for customers based upon that type of thing. So there's a lot of use cases where you could take advantage of the it's basically about what does your app do and who needs to know what it's doing and who's in there and what about the users. So those are the kind of probably common ones I've seen. Max, I don't know if you know of any others that you've seen.
No, no, and I don't.
Yeah. So I'd say, it's about proofing, it's about notifications, about creating tickets, it's about passing data to other systems. That would be another very major use case. Um, if if you're leveraging things such as one Okta tenant with another Okta tenant too, and you might have SIAM use cases, you could be passing data to another tenant, letting people know. It's all sorts of things like that. Updating users' profiles, updating rights of what people can and can't see. Even you're going to see Okta Identity Governance also start to, I think we're looking at the SIAM side as well, potentially branch out in there to do entitlement management over there as well. So from a governance side, I see customers use workflows for automating access requests, for notifications related to access certifications, for creating apps, updating apps, doing all sorts of things with that, updating CSVs. Yeah, you name it. I always tell people when they ask, what can you do with workflows? And I'm like, what can't you do? There's just so much there. So it really depends on your use case, but I could talk about it all day if we wanted to.
Cool. Well, this was awesome. Thank you. We must have you back again later this year, maybe,
Let's do it.
and maybe even more than once.
Let's do it.
But no, Christian, thank you so much. This was awesome, and thank you, folks, for joining us. Again, this is we'll put this on YouTube tomorrow. You'll get a message with I'll include all the links that we shared in that message. And again, thank you, and then we'll see you next time.
And I would love to hear which one of these things you found the most useful, because I think that would be cool to kind of get an idea what helped you the most.
Cool. All
Thanks.
right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Cheers. Thanks. Bye.